Thank you. Now I present the Honorable Chief Justice of our Supreme Court. Not Chief Justice, should be. Just, not yet. Sorry. Supreme Court Justice Elyakim Rubinstein. For me, you're the Chief.
Hi. Minister Allen, General Yadlin, everybody. You know, there's a story about President Kennedy coming to visit the Alcatraz prison many years ago, and he didn't know, they had him meet all the inmates, and he didn't know how to open up his remarks, so he said, "I'm glad you're all here." So, I'm glad you're all here, lehavdil, as they say, to honor Allen, and indeed, it's really a great honor for me to be one of those honoring Allen here. And Allen is a rare creature in the American landscape, not only by the fact that for 50 years he's been able to combine teaching in a central academic institution, the Harvard Law School, with activities as a noted criminal lawyer, appellate lawyer, a public figure, but mainly because in all his endeavors he showed unusual courage, sometimes chutzpah, as the name of his noted book. There are many law professors, there are many good lawyers, there are many public figures, but we are here in Israel and we are Jewish, and for Israel and Jews, the fact that he has had the courage as a liberal lawyer and against the stream or the trends of many of American academic liberals and, of course, the media, to defend Israel always, even when he did not agree with every policy it had, is what makes him so unique and justifies this event. To whoever doesn't know, I mean, most of you know, Allen is a son of a religious Orthodox Jewish family that reached the United States on his father's side in the 80s of the former century, and on his mother's side in the first decade of the 20th century. Was born in Brooklyn, and he grew up in Brooklyn, even as a graduate of Brooklyn College, not the Ivy League colleges. His breakthrough to the great world of American law was in the Yale Law School, and he clerked for two of the luminaries of last century's lawyers in America, Judge Bezalon, the federal court in Washington, and Justice Arthur Goldberg, whose name is well known. And he became the youngest, I assume, professor of law at Harvard in his 20s. And his professional breakthrough came already in the 70s, moving in all the 4 cycles, teaching and writing academically, writing for the public, working as a criminal lawyer, and working for human rights in general, including Israel and the Jews. And he came very far in all of these. And you can only ask, how can you push all of that in the life of one person? Each of them could fill a lifetime. For instance, Professor Dershowitz wrote over 20 books, I think closer to 20 to 25, and on his cases on Genesis, on Jews, on Israel. The United States, unlike many European countries, for instance, does have openness for Israel. Our situation there is better than elsewhere. But there are many who, far from being Israeli, friends of Israel, including Jews, whose Jewishness makes them uncomfortable. And Dershowitz became a special defender of Israel, whose voice has been heard, because without regard to criticism of this or that point in its policies, he believes in its right to exist, in its legitimacy, in its being basically just in what it's been struggling for, and in the way its legal system is functioning as a gatekeeper. And I've been following his activities far and near for many, many years, and you can only, if I had a hat, I would have a kippah, I'll do that. Okay. Alan Dershowitz is a Jewish Jew. That is, Jewishness is a major, proud part of his legacy, and he writes with concern about the future of American Jewry. He fights anti-Semitism, which has never faded away. I saw the program of an event that took place at Harvard when he retired from there about 2 months ago, and the sessions were scholarship, writing, litigation, teaching, public intellectual. Many of the speakers were Jews, and I missed the headline Jewish in at least one of the sessions, because that's his DNA, not only genetically, biologically, but also intellectually. And by the way, he was an early critic of the harsh sentencing put on Jonathan Pollard many years ago, in a period where few Jews and Jewish organizations would have said anything in that respect. And I don't speak of the guilt, I speak of the sentencing. And many of them did that later on. He also was his lawyer for a while. Pollard has been there for 28 years in prison, a few weeks ago. And he was detained, as you all know, at the gate of our embassy. I was that day in charge of the embassy, and I was told ex post factum by a security officer that this happened, and then I was called to the administration, and all hell broke loose. And it was a very bitter surprise and a blow to Israeli-American relations. And the American rage was just, but 28 years have gone by. And Israel, apologized for the mistakes of its people, big mistakes. Pollard apologized. He paid his dues. It's time for me for a while already to pardon him. Coming back to Alan, Ad 120, your grandma would say, bis 120, till 120 years, good health, God's help, in all what you're doing with the courage and chutzpah that have characterized you all these years. Go ahead. Now, I'll say a few short things. As Henry VIII said to each and every of his 6 wives, I wouldn't keep you too long. And by the way, I should have recognized Caroline. Caroline is Alan's wife, Caroline Cohen. She is Jewish. In one of the books says, how come she is Cohen? Well, My name was put into the panel, but I can't be on a panel because they're going to talk Iran, peace negotiations, and being paid to be a justice. I can't do that. You know, we're not in an ivory tower, but we are in a monastery in the court. So being a monk, I can't do that. So I want to say a good word about the state of Israel. I'm not as eloquent as Alan, but because of all the haggling internally, we forget usually to say the good word about our own country. Israel is to the audience here, I don't have to say it, but it's a historic miracle that the believers would attribute to providence, but everybody will recognize that from 24,000 Jews here in 1882, beginning of what's known as the first Aliyah, and about 60,000 Jews at the end of World War I, when General Yadlin's grandfather came here. He was also a Cohen, on his side.
He came in 1906.
So he came in the Aliyah Shniya, okay. So we became 650,000 on the eve of the independence, and we are now, thank God, over 6 million Jews, very well-known number, but this time on the positive side, and together with a minorities population of about 1.6 million. So the efforts of the Zionist movement and what preceded for over 50 years before the State of Israel enabled us to rise from the ashes of the Holocaust to a Jewish and democratic state in a part of the world where democracy is a rare commodity, very rare commodity. The ingathering of the exiles, the other miracle of the renaissance of the Hebrew language, and Ephraim Kishon used to write that it's the only country where the mothers learn the mother tongue from the children. Developing the country, science, technology, high-tech, academia, Torah world, the rule of law, democracy, functioning democracy, freedom of expression, elections, free elections, and all of that with wars and so many security problems, and even attaining peace with part of our neighbors. I was privileged to be part of the efforts in the former generation, it's now 35 years with Egypt, 20 years almost with Jordan. Other efforts with the Palestinians, the minister is now involved in that. We should all remember all of that before we complain justly, unjustly on ourselves. And we do complain all the time. Israel is a very dear deposit that Providence and Jewish history gave us, and it's a huge responsibility that we all carry, even mainly, of course, our leadership, before we come to the criticism, self-criticism, and many a time justified, many a time overdone. It's a democratic celebration. We should remember that, yes, we are not perfect, either in government or in questions of equality, mainly for the minorities and others, and we shouldn't sweep away those questions, but we do not sweep them away, and they are all the time on the public agenda and on the judicial agenda. Many try, ministers spoke about it, to shake Israeli legitimacy, some connected with the relations with the Palestinians. Most, to be honest, we're not perfect, but most of those who question our legitimacy, unlike people who criticize fairly, are affected with a grain of anti-Semitism, sometimes more than a grain. And anti-Semitism is the most ancient prejudice on earth, since Haman in the book of Esther spoke of the dispersed people among the nations. Of course, fighting anti-Semitism is not part of this evening, but I remember when I raised as cabinet secretary 26 years ago the need to monitor anti-Semitism, which we've been doing ever since, well, a very important figure in this country said to me, "Hey, what are you doing, Eli? Anti-Semitism, it's a matter of the past. Government should deal with the present and the future. Anti-Semitism is a bygone." I wish you would be right. Yesterday was the International Day of Human Rights. I'll speak briefly about the contribution of law, in particular the Supreme Court, which I'm honored to sit, and also the government legal machineries, the Attorney General. I was privileged to be one of those, and all the people that work with them in the legal service of our government, to human rights, looking inside and looking outside. This is not a legal form, so to speak, and many times people complain here on the over-legal involvement, over-legalization. They call it mishpatization, and the involvement of lawyers everywhere. It could have been right had not the reality necessitated it. I was a boy, a young man in government, and I became an old man in government, and I saw in my own eyes for 40 years the benefits that the legal system brought to make our government better, cleaner. Without it, people in the political system and elsewhere, of course not all of them, God forbid, would do with public money, public property, as if it's their own. I'm not fully objective, having served in all the legal positions of government ministries and the Attorney General and so on. But having sat for almost 15 years at the government table, I can state that I believe that if we put on one scale the criticism that you can legitimately point against lawyers, attorneys general, justices, and on the other side, the benefit to the public service and to the state of Israel and to human rights by their contribution, no question in my mind that the second scale, the benefit would be decisive. It includes appointments, budgets, land issues, equality, many issues that are every person here would agree that should be monitored, and without the involvement of the court, Supreme Court, and the government lawyers would fall into very, very sad muds. Had the Supreme Court, the Bagatz, not existed, it would have been invented, many of the public servants would tell you. Not only for Palestinians or settlers, for them too, but also for gender issues, women's rights, minorities' rights, people with medical problems, crippled people, invalids, weak populations, the environment, and the judicial system had from the very beginning to develop itself. They were not as important and as strong as the founding fathers, as Ben-Gurion. They had to build their reputation, to build their power, to build their abilities. And I believe that we owe the first generation of justices and judges a very big debt. They brought a lot of good to the network of fairness, of balancing in this very complex situation that we live in. We, as justices, have to consider, to balance, and to decide on legality of government positions when they are challenged. The government does have difficulties. They have a huge burden to carry. But because there are so many functions, there are also deviations. Sometimes because it looks operatively important, sometimes because there's no patience for the law or the procedure or for transparency as it used to be. This is a security institution. So I'll mention, everybody knows here that there's no country, no other country that has such a burden of security, no other democracy at least. And ever since the Yom Kippur War of 1973 and the Shin Bet, the GSS stories of the 80s, we are in a totally different world than we used to live in when I started in government around 1970. Security was a sacred cow. Nathan Alterman protested on it in the 50s. He was one of the first. And we do need security, and it's still a super value and an existential element. And we are not yet under our fig tree and so on, as the Bible would say. But the balancing between that and human rights has changed. And the security establishment has to raise two flags. The flag of security, which is its responsibility, and the flag of sensitivity to human rights. And when the Supreme Court has dealt with questions of gender in the IDF, questions of different note, attitude to detainees, to prisoners, questions of Palestinians, settlements, the balancing point is put in a normative place which would conform with the standards of international law and Israeli law, and it does a great service to the State of Israel. Many a time in government meetings, cabinet meetings, Pnina would remember, she was a colonel in the IDF and the legal departments, we would press on the people of the establishment, security establishment, the need, for instance, to refrain from to do their best to refrain from harming civilians. And this is not mishpatization. This is a vital need. And the court in its decisions, again, could also make mistakes, but it was kind of a catalysator for operative, proper decisions. And the opening of the gates of standing, that nobody is deprived from getting to the court, and the Supreme Court sitting as a court of original jurisdiction in these cases, it has been very helpful in this respect. Shin Bet, when in '87 the Landau Committee, many of you would remember, spoke about the need to give some permits in the investigations, it was interpreted in a very exaggerated way, and in '99 the court said no, these practices should go away. The Shin Bet at the time, I was the Attorney General, was startled. And how do we deal with all of that? Thank God they found over the years sophisticated ways to deal with the challenges, and their success in the Second Intifada attests to that. On the security fence, the International Court of Justice, what the name for that is, gave an opinion without really going into the real story. But when it came to our court, it did go into the depth of the story, and it found the balancing between the need to fight terrorism by minimizing the access, and on the other hand, the rights of Palestinian farmers to get to their fields. So the fence was rerouted in a couple of places, and we could sustain it security-wise, and the international interest went away. So, and we do take into consideration international law, despite that we know its weaknesses, its cynical use, and the anti-Israeli use in the international system, including in human rights committees that many a time don't deal with the real places where human rights are being systematically violated, but with Israel. When detainees, Palestinian detainees, or Jewish detainees, administrative detainees, petitioned to us after 2 military courts, 3 justices within days or weeks. By the way, today I got a case of Palestinians for tomorrow. 3 justices would check, would see the material, would talk to the security people, and many a time would find solutions. We may not tell the government how to lead a war, tanks or planes, but we'll go into proportionality when civil population is involved. And I could enumerate other examples, and I won't do it. One of the lessons, and I'm close to closing, is the importance of the skepticism. We have to respect security, and the human dignity, which is the headline of our basic law, includes first and foremost the right for life, and security is for that. But the lessons of the past do justify skepticism. Not every security statement is from Sinai and from the 10 Commandments. The law tries to see a wide picture of human rights, and this is what we should have in mind. It is one of the main values of Israel, but there are many others. Running a country is a very complicated challenge, and we don't have in Judaism something, and not in the Jewish democratic state, something like in the Greek saying the king has no law, the king, fra Basilius nomos agripus, you know, the old saying. Abiding the law is also the obligation of the king, of the government, and you need transparency, and you need the light. As Justice Brandeis said, the disinfection that comes with the light. And sometimes it's good to hear a good advice, even if it comes from lawyers or from judges. No fear. To finish, the legal system, the court, is an asset for the State of Israel. Sometimes it does with minutiae, it does that with small things, which look very small, but they are very important to the citizen, to the human being, to a person, and to do not only the big picture, but also an individual service to the justice of people, and I would not dwell on it at length. Let everybody think what would be here if we would not have a strong judiciary and a strong legal system. What would happen to human rights? What would happen to be a fair country? Prophet Isaiah said, Zion will be redeemed with the law, and those who return to it would be redeemed by justice. The redemption is the legitimacy, and it depends on how being a fair society. Something on a word on general public behavior. And I speak to myself, to all of you, to everybody. Humility, modesty, the conviction that all of us are prone to mistakes and to weaknesses. If I look back to the last 40 years in which I've been privileged to serve the country and witness many things, I can identify many right decisions, but also many mistakes in war and in peace. In war and in peace. Let's not suffer from overconfidence. We have to make decisions, but we should be modest. Modesty is a virtue. Our sages say that modesty is the best of all virtues. And another little advice, and excuse me, coolness. Not everything that looks like a big crisis is a real crisis. Not every newspaper headline is a reason for euphoria or for mourning. Maybe it's just a very little crisis, just made up crisis. Many times you could see the headlines, the world is crumbling, the sky is falling. In 2 days, it was like a wave in the water, it was gone. So do what you believe, do it with common sense. Common sense is something, if I could make business by importing common sense, be a rich man, and hope for the best and for God's help. Thank you very much. And again, good luck.